Welcome, welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Workforce Barriers Summit, addressing obstacles and recruitment and retention. We're so excited for you to join us today as we continue our 10-week process of exploring workforce barriers in the NEPA region. So today I am excited to bring to you something near and dear to my heart. Early childhood education. And so with that, we're going to have this session is going to be facilitated by Amy Betts. And as you can see, we have an amazing group of panelists here to join us today. During this time, as Amy facilitates the conversation, if you have a question, please feel free to place it in the chat and or raise your hand, and I will make sure that I am monitoring and putting that out there. And with that, I will hand it over to Amy.
Oh, yes, thank you so much. So for the full group, my name is Amy Betts. I'm the Community Impact Manager here at the Scranton Area Foundation. I have the pleasure of working alongside Corin to help build capacity for our nonprofits, but also to address these challenges. And so I wanted to read a little bit of kind of setting up information before I have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we jump right into the questions that we are going to chat about today. So the childcare crisis in the United States is a significant barrier to workforce participation, disproportionately impacting women and working families. Research highlights how lack of access to affordable, high-quality childcare forces many parents to delay pursuing education, training programs, or re-entering the workforce. In some cases, families leave the workforce entirely due to limited knowledge of available resources and employer-supported solutions. Employers can play a crucial role in addressing this issue by collaborating with state programs, engaging with supportive childcare providers, like some we're hearing from today, and adopting innovative approaches. Businesses can better support their employees and create a more inclusive and productive work environment. However, persistent challenges like wait lists, high costs, and accessibility remain major barriers for families. So as we begin this discussion, we have invited providers to share their perspective and experiences with families navigating the complexities of subsidized childcare. And so I'd like to welcome, and I'll ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, please introducing yourself. We'll start with Christina Valdez.
Hi, my name is Christina and I am with Along the Way. So I'm the CEO, and what we do is provide gap filling childcare. So nights and weekends, primarily in the homes of families that we serve. We are not in NEPA yet, but we hope to be there soon. We are primarily in southeastern Pennsylvania in the 5-county region, and you could think of our service as like a high-end nanny service with all of our employees having credentials just like a child care center and clearances. But we might be servicing them after school or even overnight if the parent has to work overnight. That's what we do. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. Next, we have Pam Cho.
Hi, everyone. From Community Services for Children. I'm the Vice President of the Early Learning Resource Centers, and we are responsible for administering the Child Care Subsidy Program for the state of Pennsylvania in 17 counties, mostly the northeast section of Pennsylvania, moving south into the Lehigh Valley and Bucks County.
Fantastic. Next, we have Zabeen Zidi.
Hi, I'm Sabine Saeed. I'm the president of Building Blocks Learning Center, and we are located in Luzerne County. Service over a vast amount of families, about 1,000 families. We provide childcare program for infants through pre-kindergarten and school age. And we have a collaborative efforts that we work with our local school districts. And recently, in the last year and a half, if not 2 years, we've been working with different employers to work these type of programs and provide services.
Thank you. And our last panelist today is Kathleen.
Thank you, Amy. I'm Kathleen Parridge. I am the owner of TriStar Academy. I own 4 centers in Lackawanna County, and we serve children from infants right up through school age. Um, and we've been in business for 20 years.
Fantastic. Well, thank all of you for your time to come and speak with us. And so my first question is going to be for you, Pam. What are the qualifications for subsidized care, and how can employers guide their employees to apply?
Sure. So the Child Care Subsidy Program, which is called Childcare Works, is really intended as a workforce support program. So it is for working families and is intended to really help them with tuition assistance for childcare and to ensure that children are being cared for in regulated facilities. So the eligibility is we serve children from infants up to age 13. The family income is one of the primary eligibility pieces. So the family has to be no higher than 200% of the federal poverty income guidelines. And just to give you an idea, for a family of 4, the poverty guidelines right now at 200% are about $62,400. So a family of 4 making less than that would be eligible for services. And then the child has to be a citizen of the United States. The parents do not, but the child does have to be a citizen in order to be eligible. And we provide the services for the hours that a parent is working. So they have to be either working or in some sort of job training program for at least 20 hours a week. And then we'll cover the care during the time that they are involved in that program with some added like travel time and things like that. Obviously, you have to get from place to place. And then the provider that they select, because it is a parent choice program, so they can select a provider to work with, that provider has to have an agreement with the ELRC. And generally, most providers do, and if they don't, it's not a difficult process to set up an agreement with us. And we're happy to work with parents around that if need be. In order to apply to the program, there is an application online at the Compass website. So that's www.compass.dhs.pa.gov. I'll put it in the chat so everyone can get that. Or you can visit our organization website, which I'll also put in the chat for you, and get an application, or just call and we'll send out a paper application to anybody who needs that. So the application process is relatively simple to start with. So you fill out the forms. There's a list of documentation that we need. And we have family specialists who will work with individual families to complete that process. So if anybody's struggling with what document can I use, does this count, our specialists will walk them through that process.
Fantastic. Thank you. So my next question is for Kathleen. A lot of funding and support for childcare goes directly to families as opposed to the centers and childcare organizations. How does this impact tuition rates and the ability of centers to manage cost?
Thank you, Amy. I think this topic and this question is one of the biggest misunderstandings and disconnects when we're speaking to the general population in regards to the early learning field. Parents, I know when it's time to put out the funding with the legislators, they want to help families. So there's tax credits and, public funding going directly to the families to help them. The intent is admirable, but I think when it comes time to actually using those funds to help support their child care needs, those funds are needed elsewhere. It may be to pay their rent, it may be to pay their heat, something like that. And so it doesn't really filter in to help with the child care. So a couple things happen. They can't afford the child care. And it doesn't come into the center. The funding doesn't come into the center. So therefore, the tuition burden is then placed on the families. A lot of time, the amount of tax credit or the funding that they're getting is lower than what the tuition rate is. So it doesn't, there's a disconnect there. It's the intention is wonderful, but I think the implementation of it is where we're running into a challenge. So it's just a matter of educating the public, educating the legislators, finding out where the best use of these funds would be. If it could filter into the actual programs, it would help pay the staff a livable wage so that it would lower the turnover. It would help with quality programs, and it would help minimize the cost of tuition, which in turn would help families where they really need it. Because if they could lower their childcare costs, that's really what they're hoping to do. So that's something with the public funding when it's going directly to families. It just needs to be evaluated on how to work with both sides to get the best use of the funds.
Okay. For those of you in advocacy, I'm sure that's a piece that's rattling now in your brains. This next question is for the entire panel. You don't all have to answer it, but it's open to any of you or a few of you who want to answer. So some individuals have stated have refused a raise or taken lesser paying job for fear of losing their subsidy. What could be done about this, if anything?
Well, I think the number one thing is just awareness. I think as a society, we just have to have the awareness of the impacts childcare has on, especially women, and how they balance that. I think from a perspective of even employers, I don't think there is a strong understanding from employers how big of an impact childcare is. I think we have to do a stronger job from our industry to communicate that it ends up being, it's sometimes better for them to stay home than to go to work and then pay childcare costs. So I think we have to do a better job educating the real cost of childcare and the impacts of it. I think it's a line item for people. Again, I always, talk about it was a woman's issue that, the moms just have to worry about it. But it's a family and a society issue that if we want quality care and we want our children to be educated and set up for success, what importance are we going to put to this? And it just can't be a side byproduct that, oh yeah, childcare, let's throw some money at it. No, it's a fundamental educational source of setting our, young youth up for success. So for me, I think right now there's great momentum going on of that awareness, but we got to frame it in the right way where there is work being done to bring legitimacy to the issue of childcare, of how do we support it? There's little things happening, but I think we have to make it part of the fabric of how we operate as a society, that just is, whether there's subsidies. I mean, there's so many different things coming down the pipeline right now. But we want to make sure it's not coming down to fix the issue. We want to make sure it becomes part of how we operate and how that model is set up.
Yeah, I agree with Subin, and I think it's important to continue to push the message that childcare is a workforce issue. It's not a women's issue, right? So, dads are parents too. They also need childcare. But, there's a lot of data that shows that when families are struggling with childcare, whether they are having difficulty paying for childcare or there's inconsistency in their childcare, they are less productive at work, right? So it really needs to be looked at from that perspective. And I think there are opportunities for advocacy around that as well. And we need the business community to really be involved in pushing that message, because it's your employees who are going to suffer if we continue at the rate that we're going with increasing costs for childcare and this lack of recognition of the importance, as well as the need for this early childhood education and the quality of early childhood education to support the development of our children and really prepare them for school.
And I think Pam, you're correct about, I think the business industry, they have to be the one kind of spearheading the awareness.
Right.
Because I think, again, COVID brought that about because people can go to work and all that. So education did get attention and the limelight on it. But I think a lot of work has to be done with employers speaking up because it literally is a workforce issue. If you don't have a stable quality program that provides childcare, then you don't have a stable quality employee. They can't make it on time, or if they're at work, they're worried. So I think a good way to move forward with this is how do we educate employers of how fundamental this is to having qualified workers, stable workers in their workforce. And I think when that sector starts speaking up and trying to bring attention to it and make it part of their benefit package the right way, I think we'll have a better traction.
I could share a little bit as well. So, we're kind of in a unique position because we're not a child care center and we work with employers and other community organizations. And really, the end goal is to eliminate the silos because, no employer could possibly know right away what their employees' challenges are. And so I think they're trying to solve problems in their business, and they're not totally, at least in my experience talking with many employers, aware of the mechanics of how like the childcare industry works or the social service industry, or not industry but field. And so we kind of try to piece that together and have this holistic view so that our case managers are working to identify where the benefits cliffs are. And then we can talk with employers, we could survey employers, the workforce. We've surveyed hundreds of employees in a business to see, well, what are the barriers? What is the lived experience of employees? And we do that for free. It's grant funded. And so we're trying to gather data for employers, and then I would love to work more with childcare centers and kind of eliminate the silos, right? So that's where I see, that's how we operate in southeastern Pennsylvania. But it's not like a one thing can work, right? Like if an employee has challenges and they don't want to take a job that pays more, which is the case often, right? We see that among our clients. They need a case management team that's like, no, you got this. Like, we're going to help you do this workforce training to to have wage gains so you can get over the cliff. Like, this is too much for an employee to manage themselves. And so I think just like working collaboratively more and it among everyone, like providers, employers, and social service agencies is really what's needed. And that's hard. It's hard to get people moving in unison, but we're trying our best, and we're doing it in southeastern Pennsylvania. But that's when all of our dollars, whether they're employer dollars or federal or state dollars or parent dollars, are at their best, right? When we're not duplicating, when we're just trying to maximize the efficiency of resources. And I'd love to hear from any employers on this. I'm sure there'll be a question and answer. What are obstacles to doing that? So that's kind of my take on it as a non-child care center.
Yeah, I agree. I think Christina's brought up a lot of good points. I think bringing the business community and the early education community together to the table, I think that is, where the education component comes into effect. I think the business community, the general population, they just need to understand what families and parents are facing and what's actually happening in the childcare field, so that we can find solutions and both parties can meet in the middle. I think there is a big limelight, like Subin said, the big limelight is being placed on childcare, and I think we need to take advantage of being able to tell our stories and what we've been running into. So getting the business community as our ally, I think is a good starting point.
Thank you. That's a really great way to, I mean, you all have shared some great perspective, and it's a great way to segue. Pam, I'm going to change the question just a little bit for you, but what can employers do as a benefit, and how can it support childcare centers?
Yeah, so we are required by regulation um, to review a family's eligibility every year. So, they might be eligible when we first process their application, and then a year later, if they've gotten a big raise or even a small raise, they might no longer be eligible. We do once a family is in the program, so I said the eligibility initially is 200% of the federal poverty income guidelines. Once they're in the program, they can go up to 300%. So there is some leeway in there for families to move up in terms of salary. So just wanted to be clear about that. But it does become a problem when they hit that ceiling. And so, some things that employers have done is to look at like non-cash benefits. What can they do to support their employees around tuition assistance, around additional paid time off, and those types of things? That's not always going to be what the employee is looking for, of course, because everybody wants to have a cash raise. But some other things to consider are things like subsidizing childcare through either purchase slots or scholarships or some sort of support to the childcare provider. So Zubeen mentioned some things that she's been working on. I know other providers are working on those partnerships with businesses also to sort of have those scholarship slots available and those partnerships. And I'm sure the providers can talk more about that. But I think it's important for employers to be aware of the resources, right? So some employers have gone to hiring resource navigators for their employees who can really help them to individualize like what is available to them in the community and what benefits they might be eligible for. So I think it's an interesting concept to look at. And I know we have a major employer in the Lehigh Valley who particularly has a childcare navigator who works with their staff to help them identify where they could go with their children. And definitely use us. I mean, we are available to talk to employers, to talk to individual employees or groups of employees to explain how the system works and what they might be eligible for. So we welcome any opportunities to speak with HR departments or to come in and do presentations to staff. And then, I think the other piece again goes back to advocacy, right? So the federal poverty income guidelines are determined based on census data and the consumer price index by some really archaic formula that hasn't been updated in a really long time. And it is the same for every state except Hawaii and Alaska. They have their own guidelines, but all of the other states, the income guidelines are the same. So whether you live in New York City or, a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania, those guidelines are the same in terms of your income and whether you're eligible or not. And that just seems not to be very equitable. So I think there's opportunities for additional advocacy around like how are we determining who's eligible for programs and are we doing it in a way that makes sense?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Zubeen, I would love to hear a little bit more about how you have partnered with employers to address childcare needs. I know you've talked a little bit, but if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I think, we're trying to create a web of collaboration. So I think some of you have mentioned there's not just one answer to it. So we're working with the different partners in our community in different ways. So, we work with some of the local colleges and universities in ways of maybe offering flexibility because, you know, they're college professors, they're students. Could we create some type of support system where, you know, it's exclusive to their school? Tuition wise, again, it goes back to what type of conversations can we have with the entity of seeing, is it, you know, employee sponsored? Is it a discount from us? And also, a lot of the employers have no idea of the resources that exist from ELRC, from pre-K counts, from I think it's ETIC. I always get them all mixed up in IT. CS. There are also funding sources that are out there that as a provider I have, but you know, how can the schools or the employers benefit from it for their employees? So I think the number one thing, if providers are on here or employers, I think Kristen was saying, we're in silos, right? We need to talk to each other because there's a wealth of resources out there. Let's start with that layer, even before trying to develop another layer. And I think awareness is what we're finding is the consistent factor that a lot of the employers don't know what benefits that are out there for families. So that's the top thing we're doing, is just literally knocking on doors of employers that we feel have a consistent workforce that have a different type of needs, and talking to them. Manufacturing companies are a big source of needing non-traditional type of childcare provider. They need, you know, the long hours or the mid-shift hours, and some places need overnight care. But just talking to them, we have a good partnership with I2M, a manufacturing company in Luzerne County, that we created a synergistic partnership. Alex Grover, who is the president of the company, incorporated that as part of her benefit package for employees. So I think the conversation with employers from a provider's perspective is to let them know there are options that they can, you know, create it in their HR, you know, area hub or with their HR director of how do you share the information that's out there with the parents and the families. So that's the number one way we've been working, is just literally talking to neighborhood partners, letting them know we exist and what our purpose is, and then talking to them about what are creative solutions that we can tap into to help families so they're not struggling.
Thank you so much. That was really great. And I think you did a great job of kind of teeing it up for Christina as we talk a little bit about how does a gap service, like Along the Way that you represent, help employers save money and support their employees? And can this translate to potential employees who qualify for subsidized care?
Yes, well, there's a lot of questions in there, but and there's a lot that I could say, but I'll try to kind of synthesize it. So firstly, the gap that we provide is in mitigating the silos. Of course, we provide the backup childcare, but you know, it all starts with employers actually understanding what the need is. And a lot of employers that we talk to do not know what the need is because they don't know just how bad the childcare, scarcity is, and how it's hard to find spots, and they're not connecting the dots between, oh yeah, my shift is, the childcare center closes at 6 o'clock, but my shifts end at 7 o'clock, right? And so bringing visibility to the workforce issues at that particular employer, we found to be really important because it gives us the data to then like move forward instead of it being like this big Pennsylvania data, like, childcare costs like $6.47 billion. Yes, but how much does that cost the employer, right? And so that's what we help the employer figure out. It's, as a nonprofit, we're not a hard sales kind of team. We're like, let's figure out if this works for you. And then, we do have the ability to provide childcare as backup care, so employers can purchase backup care packages. Once we survey employers, we're able to then see what percentage of them possibly qualify for programs that we have where the employer wouldn't have to pay anything into the childcare. So, for example, we have the program we're most known for is that, kind of on-demand nanny service. And that is to help families that are usually low income, working second and third shift jobs, to be able to maintain employment when there are no 24/7 childcare options. We are here to just fill gaps, not like reinvent any wheels. So if there's no center, which I know you guys are fortunate to have centers up there that are 24/7. I don't know if they're still operating, but in southeastern Pennsylvania, there's very few. And so what we do is we can, once we have the data of like who works at the employer site and what is their income and their federal poverty level threshold, we can see if we have any grant funding that would qualify them to get into the program without the employer contributing anything. But then, a lot of people don't qualify for that, or we run out of grant money. And so we work with employers to figure out, okay, what is the problem what are the problems within the workforce? And then what could we do as a partner to help address those problems? And it doesn't look the same. So, a manufacturing facility that operates 24/7, that, has tons of people in need of childcare, that's going to be a very different package than, the urgent care centers that I'm talking to that really just need some backup care when people call out on the weekend, because they're currently pulling doctors and nurse practitioners to fill like medical assistant jobs, like, because it's a small practice and they're giving the people that make the most money. When other people call out, they're filling in, and it's costing so much money. So everything looks different, but that's kind of what we do, since we operate outside of the traditional childcare system and we're not affiliated with the state, we're a nonprofit. We get grant funding to fill gaps very creatively. So I think that summarizes it. I'm sorry I took a while to answer that, but there's so much, so much to say because we don't fit into any other mold. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where there's value in being part of this conversation, because the solutions may not always fit a mold that we're used to. And so I appreciate that.
Christina, can you
Yes.
put your contact information in the chat when you get a chance?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. So the next question I have was for Zubeen, and I thought this would be really interesting to hear about. So like, what data or information goes into identifying where you might open a new site, and how can employers help guide those decisions? Do they? And if they do, how can they?
So you want to give me the loaded question? Got it. Yeah, I think, for us, and a lot of times people are like, oh, you have so many, all over Luzerne County. For us, it's not quantity, it's impact based. We look at one, there's enough children for everybody. So we don't view it as competition. We view it as, we're looking at typically 80 to 150 students, and what the need is in each area that we go into. Ours is number one is quality, to make sure we want to go into environments that can benefit from quality, can benefit from consistency. So we look at that, and again, there's plenty of programs out there, but the need is so great because, there are so many children to help support. So we look at that first. Then we look at and kind of survey the businesses around there. What type of environment are they? Corporations? Are they just more, restaurant-based, more small city-like environments? But again, all of those need a stable childcare facility, right? My conversation all the time is, hey, we have big conversations of, are we bringing the Target and are we bringing the Starbucks? But nobody ever talks about, are we bringing childcare in this area? So we look at that to see, how do we position ourselves to be not oversaturated, but bring value to the community. So that's been our basic lens that we look at when we are just thinking, where do we go next? What do we do? And we look at the other programs in the area to make sure we complement it. Our goal is not to come and bulldoze some other program. Our goal is, like we're talking about, collaboration. And I think the next thing that we're trying to work on is just making sure that our partners in this industry, that we work together, because there's more momentum, more power in being a unified front. So how do we educate people in our own industry and talk about, hey, there are sources, and how can, if I'm a larger provider, how can a smaller provider benefit from that? Because there is room for that, because there are wait lists at places. I know we talk about turnover. How are we going to, in our industry, minimize turnover? Turnover exists no matter what industry you look at. But what can we do to minimize it? And then it just goes back to funding. It goes back to how are we professionalizing our industry. So those are things we look at to go into spaces that I think we can bring a value to it, bring quality to the area, and educate people on whether we're working with businesses or if we're working with just another provider. Our whole goal is to educate and be in areas we can make an impact.
Fantastic. So Kathleen, I wanted to sort of wrap up with a question for you. Where would an investment in childcare have a bigger impact on addressing the issues or barriers that we've been hearing, right? About how the
Right.
barriers employees and employers face.
I think the bigger impact would be, as we already talked about, is the legislators getting together with the child care and early care industry, and listen to the challenges that we're having and put the funding into the centers. I mean, the early education field has been managing tight budgets forever. They know how to spend the dollars to have the biggest impact. So I think putting the funding into the early education field, into the entire field, the more I discuss this topic with various organizations, the more I realize the people don't really understand that the early education field is made up of several different programs. So you have your Head Starts, you have your pre-K counts, and then you have your infant, toddler, early Head Start, but it's all under the early childhood umbrella. So when they are funding the various programs, which is wonderful because it can offer that quality care that's needed, they're they're not funding a majority of the early education field or the child care field, and they don't realize that. They think when we're saying we need more funding, we need to do this, they're saying, okay, we'll give you the funding, and they're giving it to the certain organizations, thinking that that is being given to everyone. So I think there needs to be some education there and how that works. And that's only going to be done by collaborating, bringing the early childhood field in, and then holding us accountable, saying, okay, they gave us this money. We said we would do this, this, and this with it, and hold us accountable. Yes, we're going to go into the community and we're going to offer these services with that money. We're going to use that money to help have non-traditional care and to extend hours. We're going to use that funding to train the staff that we have so they're comfortable in providing the quality care. So I think the funding just needs to be given to the early childhood field, and we come up with the plan of how we're going to spend it, how it's going to affect the parents, the families, the community, and then report back, be held accountable. We said we would do this. Did we do it? I think that would make a bigger impact than giving the families tax credits, which I'm not opposed to the tax credits. I don't want to give that impression. I just think it's not a valuable use of the funds. In the long run, families will benefit better by having quality care, extended hours, quality staff from that end. I think they're approaching it from the wrong end. So that's how I feel the funding would be best spent in that situation.
Thank you. And I'm glad that as you kind of wrapped up there, you really addressed not just the individual families, but the workforce side of it, which is what the reason
Right.
we're convening today, right? So
Right.
do any of our other panelists want to address that question as well? What would an investment in childcare have, in addition to what Kathleen's talked about as far as the legislators and early childhood getting together? And we at the foundation love anytime people convene, right? And that's why we love these kinds of sessions to really
Right.
hear from the ground up. Any other thoughts come to mind as we're wrapping up our curated questions and open the floor for conversation?
I can just share that along the way is about to launch in April in southeastern Pennsylvania, TriShare childcare program, which we try to help where we can and not like take over anything and be very collaborative. So what we'll be doing is uh, selling childcare benefits to employers, matching it with grant money that we obtain, and we already have the bulk of the money to match the employer contribution, and then sending payment to the child care centers, so that reduces the cost for the employee by 66%. So, infant care is $12,000 an average per year. So that
Okay.
means that employers in our location, our locale, will be able to make that $12,000 immediately $4,000 for their employees. This is based off of a very successful TriShare program in Michigan. We've been in touch with them for many years, and over three short years, there's been over 200 employers that have signed on to this Michigan TriShare. So we are bringing the exact same thing to Pennsylvania. But I'm answering this in the legislative question because we're doing it when there is only a House bill that is kind of like, I don't know if it's dead in the water or if it's technically still active. It's called HB 975, and it was introduced in 2023 to basically do TriShare, what we're doing. And it's, that's a point of advocacy that employers could be like, yeah, like we want this, we will contribute in this way, because the retention rates that they're seeing in Michigan are like through the roof. Like 85% of employers that have participated, of more than 200, are saying that it's significantly increasing their employee retention. And so along the way, given that we're kind of outside of, because we're operating in all these like spaces, but we don't have state or federal funding to do so, we're just like, all right, we'll take the risk on to show Pennsylvania that this could work just like it does in Michigan. And we're taking our COVID recovery dollars that we got a very large award, and we're dedicating some of that money to do a pilot to show the legislators and to show businesses this could work just like it's working in Michigan. It could work in Pennsylvania.
Right.
But once that money it's basically money we already have. Once we've used that and we've matched all the spots of childcare, like it will be on the local counties or foundations to then bring it to their community, unless there was a state fund. So that's what I would love. HB 975.
Right. I know there is a program out of the Harrisburg area, and it's with the Pennsylvania Key. That's it appears very similar to the program that you're launching, Christina. It's Creative Childcare Solutions.
Oh yeah.
And
So I know her well, but
okay.
she helps employers. Karen Grimm Thomas helps employers
Yes.
to understand the scope of the childcare landscape and what employers
Right.
can do, but they don't actually do any kind of programs. And so,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
she actually was the one that was like, oh, HB 975, I know all
Right.
about this.
Yeah.
So, really we're kind of our entire existence, like filling in gaps that are really hard to fill because it gets tied up in legislation and regulation. Like that's kind of our niche. And
Right.
we're going out on a limb with this program, hoping we we could show, build it and they will come. And that the they
Right.
will come will be the state makes that, office that they proposed in the bill.
Nice.
So just to add on to what Christina has been talking about, what Zubin said earlier, I think there's a real need for systemic change here and not just like these little band-aids that have been coming out over the last several years. And there are some changes coming from the state in terms of the subsidy program and expansion of some of the smaller programs that have been in sort of a trial phase of recent years. So Zubin mentioned some acronyms earlier, but infant toddler contracted slots is one of those that has been actually, as I just looked at it the other day, it's been 6 years since we started that program. Which is, was intended to increase capacity for infants because infant care is the most expensive care, and has been really successful in providing that service at no cost to families. And it helps providers because it's a little bit different than the way the subsidy program works. So the subsidy program pays based on the child's attendance, and this contracted slot program pays for the slot. So if the child doesn't attend, the provider still gets paid, which obviously is a benefit to the provider. So there are a couple of other programs that are coming in the next year that I think are going to be helpful, but it's not enough. And it doesn't represent the kind of systemic change that is really needed, that, programs like what Christine is talking about are the types of things that we have to be looking at and figuring out. How can we increase capacity while maintaining the quality of services that children need and families deserve to have in the system?
I do want to, I think, going on Kathleen's point, I think, they always use the analogy of put the oxygen mask on yourself before everybody else. I do think we'll have to come to the realization that there are a lot of things helping families, teacher pipelines, but there has to be a funding source for the childcare service itself. It is a struggle. So we can have all these funding sources, but if a provider can't sustain themselves, I mean, in my area, I think 2, if not 3 closed within the last 6 months. These are, independent, small providers. So there is a reality of, yep, the teachers are getting stipends, and yep, the parents are getting subsidy programs and based on their income, and yep, the employer is going to help the parents. But who's helping the establishment maintain and sustain themselves? That is a real struggle that I think we're impacting and making a difference for the symptoms of what's going on. But the
Right.
root cause is, how can we pump the providers so we can create a more sustainable environment, from education to the providers? Because I know a lot of my partner providers need education on how to run a business, need education on how to train quality staff, need education on what is important in education to provide quality care. So I think there's a layer. Hopefully it will do its full circle, and providers will be a part of where there's some type of resource for that. I know there's a lot of things going on, but I think we will be a very solid foundation in early childhood and the workforce when our industry can stand up on its own. So I think that, as we're talking about awareness, I think that's an important thing to bring about, is not pump us with money to survive, but give us great resources to sustain ourselves. So I do want to, connect with Kathleen on that.
Yeah.
I do agree that there's a little bit that we have to look at the sustainability of the provider itself. So
I just want
Right.
to add one thing to
Right.
that as well, because I think that's another great area for potential partnership with the business community. And we're doing a pilot project in the Lehigh Valley, trying to partner up childcare facilities with a business that is near them, and doing some of this, scholarshiping and reserve slots kind of thing, but then also tapping into that businesses' resources around things like business practices that might be helpful for a childcare provider who needs help with budgeting or onboarding of staff or those kinds of things. And so having that kind of partnership in the community, I think, is another great opportunity where businesses can come together with the childcare providers.
Agreed.
This is wonderful. Do we have any questions from the floor? Nina, I saw your camera come on, so go ahead.
I wanted to add one more thing as we're talking about, lower income families not being able to afford childcare and things of that nature and house bills and budget cuts. The other population, we need to be considering is the children who qualify for an individualized education plan who no longer do, right? As testing scores go up, less children are being served through early intervention. Less children now qualify for IEPs. So this is also like the continued domino effect, right? Because if early intervention aren't giving these children IEPs, but they still need behavioral services and classroom time and speech therapy and occupational therapy, if that's not happening, then they're going to, a childcare with a typical classroom, which might not be the right setting for them. So, I think that's, another part of this that we have to remember, and all of this is correlated, right? A lot of these early intervention families are also families who qualify for ELRC. There's a very high correlation. So I think that's another, as our government, is making it harder to qualify for, again, let's say an IEP, which is government funded, they're going to be serving less children because they made it harder for your children to qualify for an IEP. So, let's say my daughter Cecilia, got speech therapy 4 years ago, but my Olivia, who's 13 months and 2 days behind her, now tests the same and she doesn't get speech therapy unless I bill my insurance and go after childcare hours. So I think that's another breakdown that we see that, again, it's that domino effect that, these children are underserved, and it's also correlating, with government funding in another sector. And then also, you're seeing if a child isn't in the right educational or childcare provider, then you're going to see behaviors, right? And then behaviors are mimicked by their peers, and then teachers are burnt out, and then children get kicked out, So it's this constant domino that isn't being served, the right way in a bigger picture, right? And I think, this awareness, on the flip side to that, is the awareness that of what early childhood education does, and not like all of the benefits that it can provide, but unfortunately, sometimes people hear negative news a little bit better, unfortunately, than they hear, positive news. And I say that in terms of like, do we need to constantly remind everybody that early childhood is linked to kindergarten, which isn't mandatory in our state, which is linked to third grade reading levels, which is linked to incarceration rates. So like sometimes you got to tell the bad story to get the point across, right? Unfortunately, like that's sometimes what we have to share as well as the good news is what happens if we don't serve and care for and educate these children.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we can definitely, as we're building those relationships with employers, that's certainly a conversation to have in that. So,
could I make
go
a quick
ahead.
So I have a unique perspective. I'm glad I came to this meeting because I'm in higher education and I'm the director of career services here at Fortis. The absolute number one reason our students drop out of getting a degree or a certification which could better their lives is childcare. We attempt to connect them with childcare, and 98% of the time it's we don't have an opening. So Kathleen, I loved what you said about the misappropriation of funds, because the money is just not getting to the populations that need it. It's going to, there's grants going out to different organizations for programs. There's grants going out to this and that, and funding, federal funding, state funding. And yet I see from the trenches that my students are having to drop out of our LPN program, our medical assisting program, our trades program, our CDL program, our dental programs, where they could have a better life and be in a different income bracket and get off of, different services, simply because there's no childcare, or they don't have the funds to afford what the childcare in our region is charging. So, for me, this is an important conversation because it's important to keep students in the programs that they get student aid for. But unfortunately, a lot of them leave Fortis having to drop out because they don't have childcare, and now they have student loan debt and nothing to show for it. So this is actually a conversation that for me is really frustrating because it seems like such a simple thing. You know, we need money to cover childcare, but it's just not happening. You know, and like I said, 98% of my students that are trying to, you know, better their lives and take care of their families have to drop out because of childcare.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yeah.
That actually circles back and connects to, I don't know if any of you were able to see the initial presentations and the information provided by the Institute from that available workforce that can't be working. And that is one of the things. So employers being aware that there's this population that almost gets there or sort of gets there or is possibly on the cusp of getting there, and then they have to drop out because this is a challenge. It's a direct impact on that ability to recruit talented, skilled labor. And so that thank you for that connection, because I think that that's a really another piece of those collaborations and that information sharing that needs to happen.
And that was a great session. So I've been going to every single one. Excellent stuff.
Thank you. And if you have not had a chance to participate in the webinars, they are being recorded and put online. And I want to be respectful of time. So I want to thank first and foremost, Amy, for facilitating today's conversation. And then I want to thank our guests for today, because the information and the reflections that you have are rich and pertinent and necessary as we move this work forward and kind of bring NEPA together as a region to address these barriers. And with that, I would like to encourage you to sign up for additional webinars. You can go to the QR code here on the thing. On the page here. And then coming up on Friday, we have an employment resource panel where we're going to have actually most of our sponsors here on talking about some of the services through CareerLink and what the chambers are doing to engage employers. On Monday, March 24th, we're going to be talking about transportation, which is another huge challenge throughout Northeast Pennsylvania. And we have some really good information coming with that. On Thursday, April 3rd, it's going to talk about what can community foundations do for employee recruitment and retention as part of their benefits. And then on Wednesday, April 9th, we're going to move up the education chain and talk a little bit about the K through 12 education. So I thank you all for being here today, and I thank you for your participation. As soon as we are able to, we will have this recording on our website. And we encourage you to go back and review some of the ones that have already happened, because there's been some good, rich information. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a wonderful day.